This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
At Walgreens, we know flu season can feel a little chaotic. So we're going to give you our flu info
in a meditation, keeping you calm, just like a certified Walgreens pharmacist will do if you're a little nervous. So walk in or schedule an appointment, and Walgreens will handle the rest.
That's the human kind of help. Walgreens.
Vaccine subject to availability. State, age, and health-related restrictions may apply.
Running out of closet space? Don't stop shopping. Start selling with The Real Real. Whether it's the jewelry your ex bought you before they became your ex, or that quiet luxury bag you bought before remembering you're actually a maximalist, give it a second chance with someone else. Sell it with The Real Real and make room in your closet for something else that feels more like you. The best part of selling with The Real Real? They handle everything from photography and copywriting to pricing and shipping, because your to-do list is already long enough. With a community of over 40 million members ready to shop what's in your closet, your items sell fast, so you can leave the past in the past. Because resale on The Real Real is for second chances. Plus, October is National Consignment Month, so new consigners earn $100 extra for a limited time. Go to therealreal.com to start selling and get $100 extra to keep shopping. That's therealreal.com for your extra $100. Therealreal.com. Terms apply.
Welcome to the Covert Narcissism podcast. I'm your host, Renee Swanson. I am not a therapist, and you are not a victim. Welcome back again to the Covert Narcissism podcast. This is a space for understanding the manipulation, rediscovering your strength, and learning how to stand in your truth again. Last week in part 1 of this 2-part series, From Bad Vegan to Truth Teller, Sarma Melngailis shared the side of her story that the world never saw, how covert narcissistic abuse hid behind charm, media attention, and misplaced trust. Well, now we continue with part 2, Covert Narcissism Unmasked, Sarma Melngailis on manipulation, awakening, and resilience. In this episode, you'll hear the wake-up moment, the practical playbook, gray rock, ice queen boundaries, and strategic no contact, the neurobiology of cognitive dissonance, and how to resist the urge for just one more explanation that keeps that door cracked ever so slightly open. I know that you're going to enjoy this episode, so thank you so much for joining us, and let's dive in. At what point in all of this, do you remember when you finally got your eyes opened to all of the manipulation and the coercion, and maybe what was it that caused those eyes to open up?
I think what's more relevant for this podcast is actually when it happened with that first guy who was more of a covert narcissist. But because in the second situation, it got so bad that this guy took me away and I was like a robot and was completely checked out. And it only ended when we got arrested. And I'm grateful that happened, because that was what pulled me away from him. And then waking up out of that took a really long time. But I remember more clearly, and I describe this in my book too, the first guy who was this, this very handsome, good-looking, sort of, again, mini celebrity chef. I was falling for all of his tactics, him convincing me that I was the one with the problem, that I have, borderline personality disorder. And so I'm looking at books about borderline personality disorder and thinking like, well, I do lose my temper sometimes, which of course is what they instigate by provoking you into doing that and blah, blah, blah. And I really got woken up out of it when it was somebody that was, oddly enough, a friend of his or a colleague or acquaintance who'd done business with him of his, who approached me one day and said, and he and I had split up, but who approached me and said, Like, this is painful for me to watch. You need to understand what kind of a person he is. And, this is what he's going to do. Because we were in this very messy split. We had opened this restaurant together, and we'd written a cookbook together, and our breakup was in the tabloids. And so it was this crazy situation. And, but it was really this man who pulled me aside and metaphorically dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. And I've found myself trying to coach some other people through this sometimes too, saying, he understood that he was going to try to manipulate me and pull me back in. And he said, you have to be an ice queen. Like, you have to now think of this tactically. Like, you have to behave with this person and understand who they are and how they operate, and understand that now the way to deal with it and get out of it or handle it, very often you now have to play a role and adopt like this cold-hearted, callous sort of personality and do some of these things that are talked about. Like, I think it's Dr. Ramani who talks about gray rocking, and just the way that you respond to these people in a very unemotional way, so they're not getting the response they want.
There's the lie.
And right. And very often, tragically, very often there are kids involved. That was never the case with me. I didn't have kids with any of these people or anybody, but I was having to get disentangled from a business with this guy, and so I had to interact with him. And when you have to interact with them, it's like you almost need to learn to deliberately turn off your emotions and behave with them in a very cold way, or at least understand that they're going to try to trigger you, and that you need to kind of have your walls up and see it for what it is, and also strategically not react in a way that's going to be fuel for them.
How did that feel to you? I know a lot of people, when I start talking, with they're in their marriage, maybe they've got kids, some don't, but they're in this marriage and they're gray rocking, or they're having to, like you're saying, play this role just to kind of figure out maybe either how to get out, or at least how to protect themselves for a while they decide what to do. And they, what I hear back from a lot of people is that it feels mean. It feels against my character. It feels like I almost have to shut my character down, who I am or who I identify myself as, in order to survive this.
Yeah, I think in my case with this man, because we didn't have kids, but in many ways that restaurant and the business and the employees felt like my kids and my family. Sure. So I turned into, like, I had a bit of that sort of mother bear energy, where on behalf of, or in the interests of protecting the restaurant and the employees and that space, I could much more easily go on offense. And also, he had behaved so grotesquely and drained me of all my money and then some. And so recognizing all of that, it wasn't hard for me to then
fight back.
To fight back and have absolutely zero, at no point, once I crossed that point, at no point did I ever feel bad for him or think, or have any feelings of, oh, poor him, he's not, that I was done with that. But yeah, I mean, it just, I mean, frankly, I can recall times where I kind of could see him trying to manipulate me. And at one point, I think I swear, I mean, I'm sure he faked it, but he started to cry in front of me. And I just sat there like completely indifferent. Yeah. And in fact, at that moment, it was genuine, because I knew he was full of it.
Yeah.
But,
and I think you reach what I hear is you reach kind of it's almost like you hit a rock bottom. Like you reach a point that you just can't take anymore. You've put in all the effort, you've put in all the compassion, you've put in all the genuineness, all the care. And I know for me, I felt like I didn't have anything left to give. And that's the point at which I really started seeing reality for what it was.
Yeah. And in all of the situations I've been in, thankfully there were no children involved, which I'm I have so much compassion for people who get in these situations and there's children involved and the custody of them is weaponized and it's a whole different level of traumatic. But in my case, there was a lot of damage financially and losing my whole business. I then ended up prosecuted and had to spend time in jail. And I've heard from a lot of women where that's happened. And so the reason why I continue to speak out and my goal with my book and in talking about these stories is I really hope that not only does my book help people feel less alone, and we very often feel, even if rationally we know how and why this happened, but you still feel shame and you feel stupid and you feel judged. And so I think my story can help people feel less like that and less alone, and maybe help understand some of the processes that went on that allowed it to happen, or that helps keep them trapped. Because again, we really do get trapped in a way that most people can't understand. But I really want a lot of younger people to understand my story and maybe read the book, and then, or anybody, and at least go through it with me to the extent that they will then be that much more likely to recognize it, not only if it's something similar is happening to them, but if they see it happening to a friend or a relative or a loved one or a mother or a daughter or a sister, and see things that they think, I read about, I remember reading about that in her book, and this kind of seems familiar. And just to help people avoid those situations, because, as in my case, once you get trapped, it's really, really, really hard to get out. And then very often you don't end up getting out until something horrible happens, and really destructive. And in my case, that was getting arrested. And then because nobody really could understand what happened to me, I ended up prosecuted and spending time in jail as well.
Yeah. Well, and I want to touch on that for a minute, because you've kind of talked about it a little bit throughout this interview, but in these relationships, we're manipulated by someone that we trust. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't go in expecting to be manipulated. We go into this relationship on a premise of trust. And then something shifts, or something, underlying is going on that we're not aware of. It's not present in us. It's not something that's on our radar at the time, because we trust this person. And then we're manipulated or coerced into doing things that maybe are against our character, things we wouldn't otherwise have done. And this is hard for people to understand, because then they go, well, you were complicit, or you participated in whatever, where we're going, okay, but I didn't. I was coerced into it. There's a difference between being complicit and being coerced. And I just wonder if
Mhm.
you could speak to that a little bit, because I think you've lived that.
Yeah. I certainly have. And that's another reason why, my book includes as much detail as it does, because it was such a part of the reason why the tabloids ran with it. I mean, the tabloids ran with it because there was all this other, because I'd had a high profile restaurant, because Alec Baldwin was part of my story. Like, there are all these reasons why the tabloid was writing about it. But also, there was these elements that I could see them sensationalizing, but they grabbed onto this part of the story that, and it stems from an original article that was written about what happened, where it said that this guy made me believe that my dog would live forever. And so there was this weird, people were like, what? How could she, she went to an Ivy League school. She used to work on Wall Street. She ran a business. She accomplished all these things. How could she be made to believe this crazy stuff? And I think when people can't find an explanation, that's what leads them to then default to, well, she must have then somehow been in on it, or something, because it doesn't make sense. How could she have how could she have been made to believe these crazy things? But in fact, that is what happened, and it is embarrassing and humiliating. And I, as I write in the book, it's not that he got me to 100% believe certain things, but he got, but there are things that you can't disprove. I mean, it's like certain people's idea of God. Well, you can't prove that there is no God, so people want to believe that, or there
Mhm.
certain things like that, or reincarnation, or a lot of these things that you can't disprove. So what he did over time is weave these sort of crazier and crazier stories and tricked me into thinking that he knew what I was thinking, or and he did this in some cases. I still don't really understand how he did certain things, but in other cases I can see that he had access to my email, and so he might be looking at it his phone and know who I was emailing, even though he was, sitting across from me, or he saw an email come in and then he quickly deletes it before I see it. And the person had said, "Oh, I'll call you in 5 minutes." And then he would say something like, "Yeah, Joe Schmo's about to call you." And then the phone rings and it's Joe Schmo. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how does he know? So he did a lot of really batty sounding things. But again, I think that's also not that uncommon, that in some of these cases it goes beyond normal relationship manipulation and it gets into this weird sort of a metaphysical messing with your spirituality and beliefs and hopes and dreams, and gets into this very tangled up place where um then they'll have you do things that aren't you're not doing what you don't think you're.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Doing the thing, you think you're doing something else, but it turns out now on the other side of it, you're going to get in trouble for it. So it's kind of what happened in my case.
Mhm. Yeah, and that goes back to that difference between being complicit, intentional, purposeful, engaged, connected, aware, and being
Yeah.
coerced.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if I should comment on this, but what happens now is that I see stories in the news like Menendez, his wife was just prosecuted. And I skimmed an article and immediately I thought, okay, I don't know because I haven't done enough research and I don't really know, but I sort of felt a bunch of compassion for her because there were enough little hints in what I read and indications that she sort of oddly kind of almost worshipped him. And that made me think, oh, those are to me, those are clues that she was brainwashed in a similar way. And then that makes it particularly tragic to me, her being sentenced to a bunch of jail time, because part of me thinks, oh my God, was she completely sort of brainwashed, manipulated in a similar way that I was, and people don't really understand it. And tragically, she might not even understand it in the same way that there are still people who were in the Nexium cult and worshipped Keith Raniere who still believe that he's, the misunderstood good guy, and
Right.
they still can't see things for what they really are. And I think that this happens sometimes where, that attachment is so strong that even when some of these people are getting sent off to jail, they still don't
Yeah.
fully realize what happened, that they were grotesquely manipulated, and that the person that they're in a relationship with is kind of effectively not a real human. I think that's probably the part that's hardest for people to accept, is that somebody that they loved is kind of, in fact, has no soul, or is deeply cold and capable of a type of cruelty that we can't even fathom. And that's dangerous to think that nobody's capable of that.
It is, and it can leave you very vulnerable. And I think what I'm hearing is, or what I'd like to take from this is, for people looking from the outside into a relationship, into a marriage, into a partnership, a business partnership, any of that, that the picture might not be what you think it is. That
Yes.
looking in, you might not really fully understand what's going on there just based on what's being presented to the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, and that happens to me a lot now is when I see certain stories, especially knowing how my story was totally portrayed incorrectly, first in the tabloids, then in the
Mhm.
Netflix show. It look makes me read between the lines a lot, and also not take things that are written in tabloids or even news stories at face value.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. So what is the name of the book that you have written?
The book is called The Girl with the Duck Tattoo. This is my copy with all the places where I was reading at a reading the other day. And it's, I have a tattoo of a duck. That was the logo for my brand.
Okay.
That I felt like was my life's purpose and ended up getting obliterated. And in fact, my ambitions and my goal for growing this business and making it really big, and it was a plant-based thing and very healthy, and I felt like this was my life's purpose, and that was one of the things that he weaponized, was that ambition and idealism. So my book is that story, but I also discuss how I started the business and grew the business, and bits and pieces of my childhood and my upbringing that are all things that a lot of readers who've been through this might resonate with, because they're sort of relevant to how later I was the person that was able to be manipulated and that sort of fell for these things. So um, yeah, and then as I said, I there's a lot of actual correspondence between me and this guy and our actual conversations that I include, and I include a lot of it, even places where I'm pushing back on him and calling him a liar, where it seems a bit paradoxical that if I'm calling him a liar, but then he still got me to do what he did, how did that happen? And so there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of my own exploring to try to understand for myself how this happened, and hopefully at the same time help other people understand how these things happen to them. So
Yeah. Did you go
yeah.
through phases, and we'll wrap it up here, but did you go through phases where um you would see it, call him out for it, and then yet the fog came back? Like
Oh
you
yes.
kind of see it and then you kind of don't. And then you kind of see it again and then you kind of don't.
Yes. Yes. And part of the way he was able to get me back in, and I think this is extremely common, is that he got me trapped sort of financially, where he'd borrowed all this money from me. And so then I wanted it back. And so he'd convinced me to let him come back, because he lived out of state. So he would say, "Oh, let me come back. I'm going to bring you some money." And so I left the door open early on too many times, where I should have closed it, cut my losses, and just, walked away. But there was so much mystery around him that I didn't understand, and so that also kept me, like, I wanted answers and I wanted explanations. I think that's a natural thing too, is like we don't
Mhm.
understand their behavior, so we want an explanation, we want some closure, but that ends up the effect of that is that we've left the door open, they get back in, and they're able to do their, like, mind manipulation on us, which, uh, I think they're able to do very effectively in person and on the phone through all kinds of tactics that I now understand a lot better, but still they're hard to understand and recognize in the moment. Um, and and yeah, I think for a lot of people it's hard to get away, because again, if there's kids involved or you're cohabitating or you're already married, it's like to get away is that much harder. Or, if you're in business together, which was also that was the situation in
It's
my
an
first.
entanglement. It's the more
Yeah.
entangled you are. Like you're trying to get out of a spider web and you're pulling it off of you, but no matter how hard you pull, there's always going to be more of it attached to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I like what you
Yeah.
said there is we want closure, and that's fair. That's a natural. We want closure, we want understanding, we want awareness, but that causes us to leave that door open just a crack to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been helpful for me to understand that, and I've gotten a lot better at um closing doors and going, not my problem, like not even if I'm curious what was really going on, or I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
nope, don't care,
Not
because
my
I've
circus.
been faced with it now since then. Yeah, in
Yeah.
various types of business situations, and because for better or worse, I'm sort of living this all out in a very public way. And so the only one benefit of that is that, if nothing else, I can talk about this stuff. So I've been writing on my Substack and writing about what I've been going through in this sort of ongoing healing process, and also still encountering predatory people, or unscrupulous people. And as I'm sure you know, there's people who have these tendencies. It's like there's all this different terminology and various levels and things where, are they covert narcissist? Are they borderline? Are they, um, there's Machiavellian. Are they sociopaths? Are they just malignant narcissists? And what are those differences? And
Or are they
I
just
feel
a
like
jerk?
I feel like I feel like I've like encountered them all.
Right.
And even some people who I think, I talked about this with Mark Vicente, who was in the Nexium cult. I think there are some people who are very manipulative and have all these characteristics of narcissism, but are unaware of it. And it's just as dangerous and maddening. But there's just different levels of it. And I feel like I've been experiencing a lot of them. So I continue to write about it. And now I feel like, for better or worse, my healing process is very open and out there. And so rather than pretending that, I've got all my stuff together on the other side of this and I'm fine, I'm actually very open about the ongoing healing process.
Good. Good. Well, to the listeners here today, how can they find you? How can they find more information, find your book?
Well, there's a website for the book called thegirlwiththeducktattoo.com. It's just the book title.com, where people could get a signed copy or get it from the printer. And I also put a ton of photographs there, so you can see, I talk about like how this guy sent me. I met him online, so I talk about how he sent me these photographs where he looks way better than he does in person. I put all that stuff online on the website. And then I'm on Instagram mostly. So it's my full name, which is at Sarma Melngailis, but I'm pretty easy to find on Instagram because I'm the only person with my name. And I also write on Substack, and that's also just Substack and my full name. So I'm pretty easy to find in those places.
Okay.
And I answer all my DMs, so usually.
Well, thank you, Sarma. Thank you so much for being here and being on this show and being vulnerable and sharing your story so that others can learn and grow from it.
Yeah, and thank you for what you do, because I feel like these conversations are and resources for people are really important, especially when they're on the immediate other side of it and looking for answers.
Yeah. Okay. Agreed. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Sarma for her honesty and her courage, for naming what so many survivors live through in silence. If you'd like to connect with Sarma or find her book, The Girl with the Duck Tattoo, check out the show notes for links and resources. If you're listening and recognizing pieces of your own story, know this: you are allowed to choose peace for your life. You're allowed to close the door on abusive relationships, and your healing matters. Your story matters, and you deserve to be heard without judgment. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. You have been listening to the Covert Narcissism podcast, where we break apart the insidious nature of these incredibly destructive and infinitely frustrating individuals. If you are caught up in this crazy-making relationship and drowning in self-doubt, guilt, or rumination, please reach out to me anytime. I offer individualized live coaching in both group and individual settings. We can find the right program for you. You do not need to go through this alone. You can find all of that information on my website at covertnarcissism.com. You can also reach out to me by email at Renee, RENEE, at covertnarcissism.com. I do look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Remember, I am not a therapist, and you are not a victim. I am a coach, and you are a survivor. information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those that she has worked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support an allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and the information provided. Thank you.